my brothers. Welcome to another event hosted by Craftsman Online. I want to thank you for being here this evening. I want to thank you for the support you've shown this entire year. You know, Craftsman Online was just a simple notion, quite frankly, that Brother Michael and I thought of during the height of this pandemic when seemingly nothing was happening in Mason other than just people surviving and trying to give back to communities, which is of course wonderful. But the connection, the education, the learning that never should stop. We want to fill a void that we just saw that was occurring within our grand jurisdiction in particular. So when you hear the name Craftsman Online, I hope you don't think of it as some generic entity, because Craftsman Online is not that. It's me, it's you, it's Brother Michael Arce from the Old 17th, it's Brother Seafree from the Southwark Masonic District, Brother Joe Cavallero from the Onondaga District, it's Brother Todd Pastorek from the Erie Masonic District, it's Anthony Prizier from the Mid-Hudson Masonic District, it's Brother Nathan Tweedy, the Central Leatherstocking District, and an army of brothers from around the state, your brothers and mine, who simply want to share more Masonic light. As I indicated, what was started as my desire to shed some light on governance issues concerning the management of our lodges and buildings has grown into a website with countless contributors to a podcast hosted by Brother Arce. I'm so pleased that you can join us this evening. I know that there are many brothers who would have been with us, but thankfully our lodges are now back opening up in their in-lodge, as I was last night. But without further ado, I present Brother Arce, who will be moderator this evening for this special program on Freemasonry and Star Wars. Brother Mike.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Ruben, and officially we can start getting geeked out now. I have to tell you, personally, I was super excited about the idea of having this Masonic talk tonight. And just so that you know, before I introduce our panel, this program is also being recorded and will be edited to be included to be part of our podcast. This episode air date will be Sunday, July 4th is when this will be available. So Monday morning for download. Without further ado, let me introduce my guests tonight. I'm super excited to welcome both of these brothers on. First is Worshipful Brother Patrick Connor, who is the Junior Past Master of Harmony Lodge number 9 in Cranston, Rhode Island. Brother Patrick Connor, welcome to Craftsman Online.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I didn't want to spare him without just some quick humiliation. I was able to visit him during his time in the East in November. They have a master's office at their lodge room, and here he is hard at work behind the master's desk. But also, most importantly, was presented with a really cool image that night from the brothers of his lodge. Yes, that is actually a Jedi lightsaber gavel. In full bloom in the East, and I believe you have it with us tonight in person.
I did. You asked me to make sure I did bring it, so I do have it with me.
I also want to introduce our other guests tonight, who during our Craftsman Online working group meetings is never short to show us his Star Wars toys. Brother Joseph Cavallero, who is a member of the Liverpool Syracuse Lodge number 501 and is also known as the resident tech brother for Craftsman Online. Brother Joe, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Let's get to this. It's been the subject of many Masonic historians and authors over the century. Of course, they're all trying to seek the origins and the elements of Masonic ritual. A lot of research has been traced to ancient cultures, religions, historical figures, although now in the 20th century, a new source has emerged, and that was Star Wars. And before tonight's program, we were just talking about the magic of the movie Star Wars. So, Brother Pat, I'll start with you. You know, growing up as a kid in the 80s, when you went to see the movie for the first time, I'm sure you probably share that same feeling, but what was it like? Was it just too short for you, or did you feel like you could climb into the screen and join that outer space world?
I mean, it blew me away. I had clearly not seen anything like it. My parents took me to the theater, so I saw it in the theater when it came out. And being a kid growing up in the middle of nowhere in Massachusetts, it was a big deal to go to the movies. So it wasn't something that happened often. So being able to see that was really exciting. really had a profound effect on me, and I really look forward to the next installments and to see where that story was going to go.
I think I recall waiting. I mean, I was knee high to a grasshopper. It must have been just before kindergarten. I couldn't even see what the sign said of the movie I was standing in line for at the time. My parents said I had to be there. It was a movie I wasn't going to want to miss. And I think that first intro of seeing that starship getting chased, I mean, right off the bat, you knew exactly what you're getting into. You're immersed. You're sitting there, you're looking at a field of stars, see a ship flying away, getting shot at, and then you just see this Star Destroyer slowly crawl into the screen. And it just went on for like football field lengths. And you were sucked in on that. And I was a fan right then and there.
The first one that I got to see in theaters was Return of the Jedi. And I remember my brother and I, coming downstairs and being so excited to finally get to see a Star Wars movie in theaters. For me, and it's still, I find this magical connection for men for so many different generations. My dad was into Star Wars. I'm into Star Wars. My son, who's 14, is into Star Wars. It becomes such an instantly easy, relatable part for all men to kind of get together, much like Freemasonry. When you become a Freemason, we can share those experiences, but it reaches across the generations. And I'm sure tonight that we're not going to be the first men or Freemasons to ever have, this discussion here with brothers listening on Masonic Talk and also on the podcast. But I want to start our journey tonight with that first moment when your love for Star Wars, your passion for Star Wars connected with something in Freemasonry. Do you remember that moment, and do you remember what that thing was, Pat?
I think that I do. I think there's a couple. I mean, one is, you learn in Empire Strikes Back, you meet this green little guy, Yoda. No one knew what it was going to be, but that little puppet, I think, gleaned more knowledge to most men our age now. We harken back to that. And I think, we always go back to pass on what you have learned. And I know in my lodge, and most lodges, right, if you're an officer, you're always told to look out for the guy ahead of you and the guy behind you, because you're going to share that information. And it's not just, learning the ritual or helping another, but it's also learning the day-to-day duties of that officer's position and running a Masonic lodge. So you're kind of learning that. And then I think we also forget about one of the quotes that I always thought in that movie that he said that really doesn't get a lot of attention is when he finally lifts the X-Wing out of the swamp, and Luke just says, I can't believe it. And that moment struck me when Yoda turns around and says, and that is why you fail. Mm. We have a lot of quotes from him, but that one is the idea of not believing. Because when you become a brother and you're going through all this stuff, you meet a friend that you learn to be a brother, right? So you kind of experience that firsthand again, because you harken back to, your favorite movie. You're going through this thing that it's new to you. Again, it harkens you back to being on an adventure and a journey.
Joe, is there something about your journey through Freemasonry that you connected with Star Wars?
Yeah, for me it's much different because I'm more of a recent Mason because I was only raised a few years ago. So unlike some, it's kind of a backward trek of now revisiting a lot of things like Star Wars and really seeing those connections and getting excited when I find them because it's just the reality of it. One of the things that really is a big recurring theme, of course, is the idea of circumscribing your passions and really dealing with emotion and your obligations. And a lot of those themes, are a lot of themes that I find in Masonry, of course. So the more I really look at it, the more things I find, to be honest with you. So it's interesting because the stories are so complex that you really can find a lot of things in there that you could say, oh yeah, that was something that is similar to something that I've learned in one of my degrees, or some other side journey that you take as you study other ideas of philosophy and stuff like that we like to talk about as well, and how it all gets wrapped up into this very interesting package.
This found your question just intriguing because I think for me in particular, especially even this past summer where I've kind of delved in so deep into Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and just mythology, which is all really what Star Wars is about. And anyone that even talks to George Lucas will, hear us and talk about how he followed, Campbell's work. But relating it back to Masonry is that is really all of our individual journeys, not only within the lodge, but certainly within our own lives. And I think that those are the lessons that we kind of take from not only Star Wars, but all mythology. And that's what kind of connects us all together, spanning all the races and religions and colors and creeds. And that's what makes, I think the story of Star Wars so gripping to every person of every walk of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think all of us, when we watch the movies, we insert ourselves as Luke Skywalker from the original 1977 Star Wars movie and that trilogy. And we imagine what choices we would make through his journey, as you said, the hero's journey. And as you go through the 3 degrees in Freemasonry, and there is that point where you feel like at times you're going through a lot of the work of becoming a Mason, becoming proficient in all of the ritual work to go through the degrees. That sometimes can be an individual thing, but just as Luke had a wise mentor or friends, faithful friends to help out, you find as you go through Masonry and you start as an entered apprentice that you were just like Luke. You were just this innocent person that didn't really know anything about the craft, and you begin to develop more and get more firm footing. By the time you reach that 3rd degree at the end and you're a master Mason, you're much like Luke Skywalker in the Return of the Jedi movie, where you're ready to get to business. So I get that. You also touched on another question I was going to ask here, is that, before we get to some of the larger themes about, Freemasonry and Star Wars, a lot of us use Star Wars sometimes as that quick reference point. Like, for example, the first time I made a Star Wars reference was when I heard of the officer line. I'm like, oh, this is like the Jedi Council, these past masters, they all get around, and they all come together in this circle and they huddle up. You kind of, when you said the diversity of Star Wars, I've also used that as an example where I said, well, sometimes when you meet with brothers outside a lodge or before a lodge meeting, it can be like that scene from, when they walked into the bar with Tatooine, and that scene right there with all the diverseness that happens in Star Wars. For our panelists, Brother Connor, have you ever had that quick reference moment that you've made thanks to Star Wars when it comes to something in Freemasonry?
I do. I think, just this weekend, I got to obligate one of my coworkers and friends into the craft. And I kind of felt that Obi-Wan moment, this, you just taking your first steps into a larger world. And for him to impress upon him how important it is and how serious it is was something that I kind of left breadcrumbs along the way, because I didn't want to just entertain any guy just wanting to apply to the lodge and, be a brother. And, so I kind of vetted him for a while, but as we talked more and as he was getting ready for the degree, I really kind of had those moments with him. And he was kind of like, very serious, like, you guys are, very serious and you do the work. And I said, yeah, I said, again, you today are Luke Skywalker. You just walked into Ben Kenobi's apartment and he just handed you the lightsaber for the first time. You ignited it. You're blown away by that, so that's your first experience. The next one, you're going to have a little more to learn about. And this one, you're going to internalize even more, because it's really about you and the place you are at that point in your life. And then that point, you're in Freemasonry. So I was able to easily make connections and relate to Star Wars and Freemasonry with examples like that with him very easily.
Brother Joe, how about you? Have you used Star Wars as a quick reference sometimes when referring to something in Masonry?
So it came up interestingly, when I was practicing for my fellowcraft degree, and my mentor was just as big a nerd as I was. So that really helped out. So, the funny thing is that a lot of ideas came into play when he would, you know, try to explain something to me or something. He would be like, you know, it's like the Force, or it's like, you know, remember this in Jedi when, you know, Luke did this or that or the other thing, and it's like, oh, okay. Like, so it was kind of funny how more him than I kind of used it as a tool to help me kind of remember things or kind of get a bigger picture idea in a way that I easily understood, because of why we're here to talk of some of the universal themes and ideas that are similar.
Mm. I'm going to pose this one to Brother Stephen Adam Rubin, our Grand Treasurer in New York. You brought up the hero with 1,000 faces, and I didn't want to discard that one because I started reading that book when I heard that George Lucas had used that as an inspiration for many of his ideas in Star Wars. So I'll start with you on this question. You know, we are based on that 3-degree, at least in Blue Lodge, process. Do you feel that, you know, Freemasonry and the readings that you've made in the book, do you feel that, you know, we follow that same journey pattern?
We do, and what I appreciate what we're doing here tonight and what we've tried to do, quite frankly, Craftsman Online, and quite frankly, I think other keys have done on Zoom, is start talking about these themes more. I think, you know, our ritual is, in fact, it's so educational and informative, and I find that too frequently we brush over our ritual too quickly and you just use it as it's also, sometimes it becomes almost an annoyance because you want to close down the lodge and get to the bar for a drink with your brothers, when the fact is that these are all, every single time that we open and close lodges and we do the degree work, it's all educational and learning tools. And we're supposed to be, you know, bringing this inside of our hearts and our souls, and then taking that outside of our lodges and shaping how we live and conduct our own lives. I think that, you know, the themes from Star Wars, the theme from you know, Joseph Campbell and many of the mythologies that one could read about are in fact what where Freemasonry derives its heart and soul. And those very same lessons that were being taught 1,000 years ago are being taught in our lodges this very evening. And those are the lessons that we must really try to strive to abide by, and not merely, you know, as I like to say, we have to live by the words and not just parrot the words.
One thought that I have on that is that for us, you know, there's the 3 components, right? And a lot of what Joseph Campbell shares with the stories is there's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I don't think that that's necessarily true in Freemasonry. I think for a lot of us, the end is really that second beginning where we now have that light and we're off seeking and trying to continue to enrich ourselves. So I want to focus on that central concept that is throughout the Star Wars saga. It doesn't matter what movie you're into. It's the concept of the Force. It's that unseen energy that powers and connects all living things. Let me start with Brother Cavallaro. You know, how do you apply the meaning of the Force in Freemasonry? What does it represent to you?
I mean, that's a tricky one. I mean, because really it is essentially spirituality to a certain extent, and in that it's that ability to tap into your environment, you know, in a realistic sense and not a, you know, magic wielding sense. And in a realistic sense, it is that empathy you have for others. It's that ability to connect with people. And I'm of the persuasion that positive thinking brings positive results, and negative thinking, you know, can be a hindrance to success. So therefore, there's definitely some kind of force, if you will, that governs what we do. And Masonry, you know, it's that part of my life where it is spiritual to a certain extent. It's very personal, and it's about learning who I am and learning how I can contribute to my lodge and my community and the world around me. So, you know, it's constantly getting excited about things, using that energy, that whole idea of that, and really fanning out and spreading that. So kind of a complicated question, really, because you could get me down a long rabbit hole on that philosophically, but essentially that's really what it means to me.
No, it's a beautiful answer, because I think for moviegoers that just go in expecting to see a sci-fi movie, and then there is this force concept, this Zen that exists, that it connected, and you start to think of other people. That's pretty deep for someone that's just, ponying up a few bucks back in the day to go see a movie about blasters and lightsabers and creatures from outer space flying around.
But the funny thing is, and people kind of bash on the newer ones, and maybe rightfully so, but the one scene that I love is where, Rey's sitting on the rock and Luke slaps her, and it's just like, no, you got it all wrong. It's about your feelings. Reach out. And she's like, oh yeah, duh. And I think all of us have that moment where we just like have that, oh duh, yeah, it's
right. Yeah, we come to Freemasonry expecting to get the answers of those larger questions in life, when honestly what we learn is they've been inside us this whole time. We just had to have that confidence, that slap. And usually in a Masonic lodge, it's from like the secretary or a past master. They're never too shy to give you those smacks when you need them. So just because I know, Brother Connor, I can get a little bit deeper on this question when we talk about the concept of the Force. I remember the reaction you had when episode 1 and 2 came out and talked about almost that DNA concept of how Anakin was special and unique and having this force. And to keep it in the Masonic realm, I want to talk about how, as Masons, the first place that we're made is in our heart. And there can be men like Brother Cavallaro and myself who go our adult life without knowing that we want to become a Mason, but somehow that path leads us to the door of a lodge. So I'm going to set you up with that part and see where you go with the Force from there.
We often say you were here made a Mason, but we also say you were first made a Mason in your heart, right? So you have something that another brother that vouched for you and allowed you to knock on that door, right? So you've been vetted by a brother that felt that you would be worth something, right? So very similar to being pulled into that journey. Obi-Wan Kenobi knew that this kid Luke had something going on, right? Because he knew his father. He knew his father was a good guy. I mean, you see at the end of the prequels there, the last one, when he says, I loved you, Anakin. You were a brother to me. And I think that speaks volumes, because they were so close. And I think when you kind of learn that story about Vader, right, you just thought he was the baddest baddie ever. And you're such a good guy, you want to be the bad guy. But then you realize that path that he strayed on to go to the dark side, it's the same path that whether you are doing the right or doing the good, it's a very narrow path, and very easily you could be pulled one way or the other, right? He wasn't pulled because he wanted to rule or anything, right? He wasn't going to be like the emperor. He just wanted to save the woman he loved, right? And he was barely allowed to love in the first place, and that whole thing. So that kind of adds to it. But when I look at kind of what Brother Cavallaro is talking about is the kind of the idea of the Force is kind of like your invisible compasses, right? Keep everything within circumspection, your due passions. And that really goes to me, I think, is when you look at Empire Strikes Back has a lot of these themes in there, especially when Luke goes to Dagobah and he's like surfing around and he fights Vader, beheads him, his helmet explodes and it's his face. As you reflect upon it time and time again, as you grow up through the years, it has a different meaning. And I think when you become older and wiser, and you reflect upon it, you realize, well, his demons were him. It wasn't Vader. It wasn't his father. And, you can look at that. Well, that was, foreshadowing who his dad could be, maybe, and possibly. But I also think the path he was on, that was a clear indication for him that you could go either way. It's the choices you make, the people you surround yourself with. And I think in Freemasons, I think a lot of gentlemen and their wives enjoy us being around the brotherhood, because we could be going out doing many other things that probably are unscrupulous, right? But seriously, but you look at what you surround yourself with. Good men becoming better, right? We've often used that phrase. But I think when you surround yourself with like-minded gentlemen that have these, it opens up conversations like this, where would you ever think that you're going to get someone in Freemasonry and Star Wars? Well, because Freemasonry introduces you to guys that like things. So you would be able to have something like this. So I think that there's so many lessons that you can pull out, like from the first three. You've got, your EA is very much Luke, the farm boy, going to get introduced to this world. You look at your Empire Strikes Back, that's your fellow craft, and kind of going through the trials and tribulations of yourself and life, and learning, the good, the narrow, and that, that checkered path that we often walk. And then I think when you get to your Master Mason, you're looking at death and redemption. You end on a solemn note of death. And I think that's really kind of symbolic. The fact that there's three, that's kind of neat. As Right Worshipful Reuben said, that hero's journey definitely drew a lot from. I actually got to attend at the Brooklyn Museum of Art when I lived in the New York metropolitan area. I went to see where they had Magic of the Myth Star Wars exhibit. And it was beautiful because they had each portion of the hero's journey broken out into pieces, and everything in that room on the exhibit had to do with that piece of the story. So to say that it wasn't, it obviously was, but then to put all those pieces together visually, it was just amazing.
Another reason to be envious. Jedi lightsaber, master's gavel, and you also got to see that exhibit. So far 2 for 2 if you're keeping score at home. And you set up my next question beautifully. The beauty of Star Wars is that you can be 7 or 8 years old and going with your father or your uncle or grandfather or just important people in your life to go see that movie, or now at home on Disney Plus. But you can also be a 30-year-old or a mature adult and still get that same experience. And one of the things that for us when we were younger was this idea of the Jedi Council, these leaders. We know that these were like the important guys. And in the first 3 movies, we didn't know very much about the Jedi Council, just that there weren't very many of them left and something happened. And then later on in the installments and earlier when they get into the prequels and then the subsequent sequels, we start to learn more about these guys. And this has always been a conversation that I've had with brothers in Masonry, is that Freemasonry is not a religion, but there is a lot of religious or spiritual aspects that are injected into our ritual and parts of our craft. So I just want to, bringing this into the Masonic conversation, in Star Wars, they have the Jedi Council. In lodges, we have masters of the lodge and apprentices or students. Do you see Masons kind of as that spiritual warrior character like a Jedi?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a Sir Knight, so being a member of my commandery, I mean, you think of what were they based? The whole idea and concept of Jedis were based on samurai, warrior monks, right? So it can instantly harken back to my commandery. And what are they? Warrior monks, So yeah, there's a lot of correlation in with that. I think that, you have the idea of your council, like you were pointing out, your Jedi Council. When you're a master, who is your council that you seek to get advice from? It is probably your past masters. In my lodge, I am very proud to say that our past masters have a very hands-off way of running. They don't run the lodge. You as the master have worked your way up after 8 years for that title in that position, been elected, and they let you run it the way you see fit. But they are there to give you the counsel, whether it be gentle counsel to put in your ear, like, you probably missed something, or you should be a little bit better on this piece of ritual. They're going to give you that. And that's great because they want to see you succeed. They want to see the lodge be better. So yeah, the council is a very, very, I think, important part, but they're there to kind of guide. They're not there to take over or presume to put their opinions on things. But I think that, when you compare the two, you have a lot more, I think, in lodges, you have a lot more flexibility to have that very on the level conversation with a past master to hearken and get his advice.
Brother Cavallero, how are you seeing spiritual warriors of the Jedi and Freemasons?
I mean, it's all about the light. So,
It's a t-shirt right there. It's all about the light.
It's all about the light. It's funny. I was thinking about this, and it's almost like I read your mind because I was thinking this kind of question was going to come up. So to me, it's like the Jedi Council could have kind of gone a couple ways, because I kind of saw it, in some ways almost as a loose parallel to like a Grand Lodge, body that kind of oversees everybody in their jurisdiction, not just a particular singular one. Each of these, Jedi Masters and Padawans and their associated, friends and helpers all come from different planets, different systems, different races. So it's almost in one sense, like, to me, those were like, they're like, the Jedi Masters are like, the masters of their own little lodges in that way. And then so the council was more like a Grand Lodge, presumably of, more experienced, older, wiser, what have you, however you want to put it. That was my take on it.
He's not older, but I know that he's wiser, and he's peaked up to this question. So, Brother Ruben, did you want to chime in on the Jedi Council and Freemasonry?
What I found whenever we look in our own lives, whether it's in lodge or just our own professions or our own family, that when you look for answers from others, you're not necessarily going to find them. I think many of the answers must come from within, yet you learn from others from outside. What I appreciate so much, what I believe is really happening now within the craft, are the thoughtful conversations that are taking place within lodges, within forums like this, where brothers are actually quantifying and trying to understand the journey that they are on and that they're taking. I can say that when I first joined Masonry, and some have heard my story, I had really no clue what I was even getting myself into. And as I say, I don't know when it happened for me, but there was a moment in my life where I started to feel like a Master Mason, almost like a Jedi warrior, and it empowers you and it emboldens you to live a certain life, and to conduct yourself in a certain way. And I really do feel, as a Master Mason, like a Jedi warrior. We are the fighters for the light, and we're certainly not perfect. And as brother brother Jeremiah King said earlier, that Darth Vader couldn't subdue his passions and went to the dark side, and we all struggle every day of our lives, whether it's in the lodge or outside, to make those same struggles ourselves. And we will fail, and God willing, we will succeed and rise from our failures. And these are all the lessons I think that we learn in the craft. And Star Wars is just kind of another way to say the lessons that we can learn from within our lodge or from any sort of understanding of mythology. That's the journey that each of us are on, individually, and then as we ultimately come together collectively. The councils are wonderful. We can learn. We look for answers and guidance for those that are more experienced, and of course, we always must and should do that. But if you have to put your faith in yourself and make the decisions for you as you go through your life.
Beautiful points. I was thinking of how in the Star Wars world, the Jedi were almost all equal. Just like in Masonry, the title of brother, that's the highest title that you could ever get. But we do look at those who move on in the fraternity to other positions or leadership roles, and we give them the respect that they get for that office or that position because they've earned it and they hold that spot. Like you as a Right Worshipful, I would refer to you as Right Worshipful Ruben until you say, no, it's just Steve. Just call me Steve. It's like, okay, we can do that as brothers. And I was thinking how, when in the Star Wars movies, when the Jedi were among regular people, they were always surprised to see the Jedi because at certain points in the story, there's so few of them, they're believed to have been hunted out to extinction. And they looked at the Jedis in a certain way that, as we are told in our degrees, that we should be acting as better people, as upright men and Masons. And while you were talking, I was thinking of, I guess on those lodge nights when I need to wear a tuxedo for a degree or something special that's going to be happening at lodge, that doesn't happen for a lot of the men that I know every Monday night or the fourth, Thursday of the month. They don't have those moments, and yet we do. And when we walk out that way with our Masonic ring on or or nameplate or whatever it would be that would identify us as a Freemason, then we are putting that out on display, much like the Jedi do when they would just walk. But they wouldn't act any differently. They would just act the way that to the code that they know that they need to live by. So that's a great point. You got me flowing there. That was a good one, Brother Steve. So the other great story that follows through Freemasonry, and through Star Wars, is the classic, good versus evil. We have to have that. The good guys, the bad guys. And in this one, it's the Jedi versus the dark side. We all know that. I have to be careful how we talk about this question because I don't want us to get into any trouble with violating Masonic secrets or giving away any of the obligations that we've taken in the degrees. But my question I'll start with you, Brother Cavallaro, is what intrigues you about the various characters' journeys when they go from quote unquote dark places to enlightenment in the Star Wars storyline, the ancillary characters? And Luke sometimes does himself, as so do the others, but now we can talk more about the supporting cast, so to speak, of Star Wars members.
Well, it's interesting because they all have their own arc. They all seem to face a very similar thing, though, at the end of the day, and we do keep coming back to this idea of the hero's journey, and once again with this belief in the Force, you have a character like Solo who kind of doesn't believe in that magic, that nonsense. His blaster's going to get him through the day every day, all the time. It's just not so. He has to acknowledge it. That's just not it. He's lived his entire life believing this, and then he realizes that Luke and Leia have this power that he can never have, and they reassure him it's not about the power. It's not about the Force. You're special because you are who you are. So that's a very interesting one-off there, in that you really focus on the non-magic character, as it was, the non-droid, the non-whatever. And just like a lodge, everybody brings that something special to the table for the team, for the lodge, for the group.
Interesting. I was kind of reading the chat as we were talking here, and Brother John Lentine mentioned something about the revolution. So if you're not talking about the main characters in Star Wars, right, I look at it as, and comparing that to New England lodges, for instance, the brothers are what started the Revolutionary War, right? The brothers in St. John's Lodge, #1 here in Providence, and eventually they broke off, and Ephraim Bowen, one of the main guys, started Harmony Lodge. They actually lured a boat that was in chase, and basically did the first act of aggression of the Revolutionary War. Most people, when they think of the shots in Boston ringing out, and that the Boston Massacre, when it actually was the Gatsby. The burning of the Gatsby was the first act of aggression by America against the British Revolution. And I look at that, I kind of go right to Rogue One, right? Because I go into the nondescript characters. That was a movie. It didn't have any Jedi, didn't really have any Force, but yet they still talked about the Force. And they really, talked about hope. Hope is what a revolution, freedom's based on. And I think when you look at Freemasonry, the morals and the things we stand for, the way, if you ever got to hear, there's a lecture from one of the former Grand Masters of Washington, D.C., and he talks about a lot of the symbolism around the D.C. area. I mean, the fact that George Washington made sure to buy parcels of land so that our government was built on a square. It's symbolic, and it all had to do with his Masonic roots. And I think the Masons realized that they weren't going to adhere to tyranny, just like you look at the Rebel Alliance, not adhering to the tyranny of the Empire. But I think what still kind of, when you go back to the prequels and you can start watching it on Disney Plus with the Bad Batch and the Mandalorian, you get more of that story. You kind of learn that, like, well, wait a second, the stormtroopers were the clone troopers, but the clone troopers were with the good guys and fighting with the Jedi. So how did they become the baddies? And you kind of as a kid, you might not kind of understood that, and I think it was probably better 30 years later they released, the prequels. So when you looked at it, you could kind of, as an adult, saying, yeah, that's how freedom dies, with thunderous applause. And we've seen that time and time again as history, tends to repeat. And I think Freemasonry is a basis of why a revolutionary is in existence, because they will stop tyranny. They will not stand for it because they have a hard set of core beliefs that we should be kind to one another. You're to help one another. You're to enjoy and be at peace, very much like the Force, with one of nature. Go out and, explore various windings and stuff like that. You learn things like that in the fellowcraft. So it's interesting how there's so many little pieces you can put together. But just, as the one brother in the chat mentioned, the revolutionary started by that. I got to visit a lodge that my father-in-law was chaplain for 30 years, the Lodge of St. Andrew. And, we all talk and we all love to say, well, it's rumored that Freemasons started the Boston Tea Party. When I first met my father-in-law and went in his library, I picked up a book, 150-year anniversary of this lodge, and I'm looking at it, and there's a photograph that really rung in my head, and I kind of bring it to him, and what is this I'm looking at? Because it has the lodge. It's a picture of like lodge minutes, and it says you took collation back in 1775 or whatever, and it says tea 3 inches high. What's that mean? And he goes, well, that's the night of the Boston Tea Party. So, leaving those breadcrumbs of me being a history buff, ran back, grabbed another book, and here I find, information in a book that 500 were made. How many exist to this day? Unless you go to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, you might not even find one. But you can go in there, and it talks about Joseph A. Warren, who was the Grand Master of Boston, Master of Lodge of St. Andrews, was being questioned for acts like a Mohican. So we might talk about it and think like, yeah, Freemasons, and we don't really have hard facts. But if you dig into those libraries, gentlemen, I guarantee you will find those facts.
Well, this is the first for me. I've never done a podcast that we have an audience here on the Masonic Talks and also on Facebook Live. So, audience, I want to give you a ton of appreciation for being here with us tonight. And I'm going to get our panelists out of here and you out of here on this final question. And it's kind of the reason why we're all here. This year marks the 50th anniversary of Lucasfilms, which is George Lucas's film company. Well, Lucas was not a brother of the craft. There is no doubt, as we've talked about tonight, that his work definitely connects strongly with our members and with the teachings, you would say, Masonically. And just as Freemasonry is not a religion, neither are the Jedi. Yet we are both kind of deeply bound to moral teachings. And in Freemasonry, we say, so mote it be, at the end of prayer, as you saw at Invocation tonight. And the Jedi phrase, it's may the Force be with you. So I'm going to start with Brother Cavallaro first. How do you see the balance between religion and morality between Star Wars and Freemasonry?
If you really want to delve into the idea of once again, the nature of the dark side and the light side, and we believe in opposites exist. I mean, that's just the reality of that. So really coming back to full circle of what I said earlier about Freemasonry and the light and being able to share that light, I think that's really where that kind of whole thing goes right there for me.
I kind of look at it like, again, I'll harken back to like Rogue One, like Chirrut, and he's a very spiritual person, right? He's blind, but he's very strong with the Force. And when you're in that marketplace and he's walking by and he says, may the force of others be with you. That was originally what Lucas had scripted to be the catchphrase. And somehow it got shortened and things and became, may the Force be with you. But when you think about may the force of others be with you, that even hits home more, right? Because I think that's really what we're about. Because we know we're not on this journey alone. And without those brothers on your side to have that support, you can continue through that journey, whether it's life or anything. And I think Star Wars has a lot of things we draw upon that, because it's not just for you. It can be part of your family as well.
Well, I want to thank you both for your time this evening and all of your insight and perspectives. And I will turn over the lightsaber of authority to our Right Worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin, Grand Treasurer, the host, to close with his remarks.
Brother Mike, Brother Joe, Brother Patrick, thank you so much for this evening, for your thoughtful comments. I would also thank all of the special brothers who zoomed in and your comments that you made. As some of the brothers were talking, I had the opportunity, of course, to see who was on with us. And I know probably 95% of the brothers who have zoomed in, and I just love you to death. And the fact that you're being just here demonstrates the sort of brothers that you are. You're searching for conversations and dialogue and introspective thoughts with respect to our individual and collective journey. You know, Brother Patrick mentioned, you know, his children. I recall when my son, I have two children, when my son was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and he was just at that age where he could start to watch, you know, the Star Wars movies. I don't even remember what year it was, but he watched, you know, the first Star Wars movie. We got it on probably DVD, or they probably, I don't even think we had DVDs back then. But after he saw it, and I pulled him aside one day and I told him, I said, you have to promise me not to tell anyone this very special secret, but I'm a Jedi warrior, and that means that you're a Jedi warrior. And that little guy was so freaking happy for so long. And honestly, it broke my heart when I told him I was joking and he was a Jedi warrior. That was the biggest mistake I ever made. But what actually happened, and I said this earlier in the broadcast, is that I actually feel that way now as a Master Mason. And it wasn't when I came into the craft, and it wasn't when I was raised. You know, the angels did not sing, and the beam of light did not shine on my head. But along the journey, I started to change the way I felt about myself and about the journey. And as Brother Joe said, and Brother Joe said it so well, and it's all part of the hero's journey, and that is that we're all heroes. That all of you brothers are heroes. You wake up every single day, you go to your jobs, and you do the best job you can so you can do well out in the world and support your family, and you're trying to be the best fathers and husbands that you possibly can be. And once again, we're not perfect, but we are learning and always trying to improve ourselves. And that is the beauty of the craft. And that is really the beauty of all mythology, which is Masonry, which is part of this long, beautiful history of mankind, of learning from each other and growing individually and collectively. My brothers all, thank you so much. God bless you. Have a wonderful summer. Please let us know if you're having barbecues or golf outings and golf tournaments. We'd love to see you in person. Thank goodness after this whole long, horrible year. And we will look forward to seeing you back in August, where we will commence once again these wonderful programs, educational moments that we can share together. God bless you all.